Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard, here on Health Professional Radio. Thank you so much for joining us again. City of Hope, one of the largest cancer research and treatment organizations in the United States, conducted a study showing that chemicals called parabens, which are found in widely used hair and personal care products, causes more harmful effects on breast cancer cells originating from Black women compared to cell lines from white women. Well, joining us is Dr. Lindsay Trevino, assistant professor in City of Hope's Division of Health Equities. She's going to discuss the study and talk a bit about the importance of educating women on the effects of some common personal products that contain parabens. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Lindsay Trevino. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here today.
Well, doctor, if you would tell us just a little bit about yourself briefly, and then let's talk about the study and the significance of its findings.
So I'm trained as a bench scientist, meaning that I do work in the laboratory using cell lines and animal models, but I'm also interested in translating what we find in the lab out into the community. And so that's kind of how the beginning of this study came about, because I am able to collaborate with people who are in the community, who are doing community-based participatory research, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And it really is gratifying for me to be able to take what we find in the lab and make sure that it has direct translational application in the communities that are impacted by paraben exposure or other exposure to other endocrine disrupting chemicals, as well as those who have disparities in some health outcomes.
Tell us a bit about the study design and some of the significant findings.
Right. So as you mentioned, parabens are endocrine disrupting chemicals that are commonly used as preservatives in hair and other personal care products. And parabens have been shown to cause breast cancer cells to grow, invade, spread, and express genes linked to cancer and to hormone action. However, these studies were conducted with cell lines that were derived from white women, and to date, no studies have looked at what the effects of parabens are in diverse breast cancer cell lines, including cell lines from Black women. Mm-hmm. So that is what we set out to do in the laboratory. We tested the effects of parabens on breast cancer cell lines from Black women, and we found that parabens increased the growth or cell survival of a Black breast cancer cell line, but we did not see the same effect in the white breast cancer cell line at the same dose. We also found that parabens increased expression of genes linked to estrogen action in breast cancer cell lines from both Black and white women. And we also found that butylparaben and propylparaben had a greater effect than methylparaben on cell growth and estrogen-regulated gene expression. And this was interesting to us because the Environmental Working Group, a nonpartisan, nonprofit research and advocacy organization, has designated butylparaben and propylparaben a 9 on their hazard scale, and methylparaben a 3 to 4 on that same scale. And so the scale goes from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most hazardous. And so we find that the butylparaben and propylparaben that are more hazardous on that scale had the greater effect on the parameters that we measured in the lab.
What is it about parabens that link them to cancer so significantly?
Yeah, so scientists are still examining the direct link between paraben exposure and cancer risk. Mm-hmm. But in the context of breast cancer, as I mentioned before, parabens have been shown to cause breast cancer cells to grow, invade, spread, and express genes linked to cancer and to hormone action. And so we do need more studies to really examine the link between paraben exposure and other cancers.
Is breast cancer the only type of cancer linked to these parabens, or are there other types as well?
Yeah, so research has focused mainly on the link between parabens and breast cancer risk. And so we really do need more studies when we start thinking about what other types of cancer may be associated with increased risk due to exposure. But I will say that the parabens are endocrine disrupting chemicals, as I mentioned, and there are other endocrine disrupting chemicals in hair and personal care products that may be linked to other, increased risk for other types of cancers. So this is an area that really needs further study.
What are some of those compounds? Are they readily? Can you read them on the label? Are they, or do you have to do a lot of research to find out what you should be on the lookout for?
There are usually, the chemical ingredients are usually out there on the labels. But it's hard for the general public to know what some of those chemicals are and what they do and which ones might be endocrine disrupting chemicals. So in addition to parabens, you should be on the lookout for formaldehyde, phthalates, and fragrance. So not many people know that fragrance is actually a catch-all term for pretty much any chemical that produces a scent that the company wants to put in the product. And a lot of these chemicals do not have to be on the label. So when it just says fragrance, it could be hundreds of chemicals that you don't know what they do, and they could be endocrine disrupting chemicals. So those are the things to be on the lookout for.
Did your research show that different groups of people may be at higher risk for different types of cancers when exposed to these parabens and other chemicals?
So we didn't really do the type of study that looks at the direct link between the paraben exposure and the risk for cancer, because that would be more of an epidemiological study, and what we did was in the lab. But we did find that the breast cancer cell line from Black women seemed to have a greater effect when treated with the parabens than the white breast cancer cell line.
So speak a bit to the importance of diversity in these clinical trials and with the diversity in the cells that scientists are studying.
Diversity in scientific research and clinical trials is critically important to address known cancer disparities. The factors that contribute to cancer health disparities are complex and interrelated, and these factors include environmental, behavioral, social, clinical, cultural, psychological, as well as biological factors. And the difference in many of these factors are directly influenced by structural and systemic racism. So in the context of breast cancer and this study, it's important to understand that there's the social, cultural perspective of hair and identity for Black women, the types of hair products they use, and how these products could be increasing their risk for breast cancer. So we know that Black women are 41% more likely to die from breast cancer than white women. And according to a study by the Environmental Working Group, there are fewer options for hair and beauty products that do not contain hazardous chemicals, including parabens, for Black women. And my colleague, Dr. Jide Tete, has done previous research where she was involved with a study where they actually spoke to Black women and their partners in Southern California and found that hair is synonymous with identity for Black women. And there is this idea or focus on these Eurocentric ideals of beauty that force the use of products that are hazardous to women's health. And so when we think about diversity in scientific research and clinical trials, it's crucially important because we're not just focusing on, the biological factors in the cells, but also how there are other complex factors that play into this as well.
Are there any steps that women can take in order to reduce or maybe even eliminate their exposure to these parabens in their personal care products?
Yes. So one, you can use fewer products. Two, you can incorporate apps to help you make informed choices when purchasing products. And so these apps include Clearia, DetoxMe, EWG Healthy Living, and Think Dirty. And you can also advocate for better policies. So there's a Safer Beauty bill package through the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners website that you can send a letter to Congress asking them to support this bill.
Well, if you would, give us a website where we can learn more about City of Hope.
The website for the Safer Beauty Bill package is www.bcpp.org/take action.
Dr. Trevino, I thank you for joining us here on Health Professional Radio this evening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Lindsay Trevino. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.